Thank you, everyone. Please, if you'd like to join us, there's more seats here in the center. We'd love to have you up close and personal as we get started for the plenary session. Apologize, we're just having a little bit of technical difficulties here, but we'll get started momentarily. Okay. So just a friendly reminder for you to turn off all your electronic devices onto silent mode or vibrate mode for this afternoon's presentation. So just going to get started with a short video here.
Facing challenges in life is inevitable. Backing down is optional. With a lot of perseverance and some help from Easter Seals, kids like Zach have become unstoppable. Visit easterseals.ca and donate today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Anna Maria, and I am dependable. I am knowledgeable, and I am unstoppable. As Vice President of Easter Seals Canada, I am delighted to be your MC for this afternoon. I want to first begin by acknowledging the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, including the Inuit, the Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. On behalf of Easter Seals Canada, thank you all for participating here with us today. I want to thank our online viewers who are taking time for their busy schedule as well to join us today for our inaugural community conference entitled Beyond Social Inclusion, a closer look at the intersections of employment, education, and income disparity for people living with disabilities. Your presence here today serves as a clear testament to the relevance and importance of today's conference. For those of you who participated in this morning's conference, I hope you took advantage of every opportunity to expand your knowledge, to network with leading experts and professionals, and to share your own experiences as you engage in meaningful and thought-provoking conversations with one another. Please feel free to engage in social media during this afternoon's discussion using hashtag Community Easter Seals Conference, hashtag Beyond Social Inclusion, and hashtag Unstoppable. Our plenary discussion is being broadcast live via this live stream in cities all across Canada. Following the plenary discussion, our panel of speakers will take a few questions from the audience. For our online viewers, please use the chat feature in the live stream platform. We will have someone on site to monitor this for us. Subsequently, we will present the Student Innovation Competition Awards and closing remarks to end our day together. Sorry, just let me get through this. There we go. Without further delay, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce President and CEO of Easter Seals Canada, Mr. Dave Starrett. He has been at the helm of Easter Seals since 2015. Mr. Starrett brings with him over 25 years of multiple disciplinary leadership in the retail sector with Moore's Clothing for Men. Dave's family has been personally touched by health issues affecting many Canadians, and upon leaving Moore's, he entered the charitable sector to make a positive difference in the lives of children and adults living with disabilities. Please join me in welcoming Dave to officially welcome you here today and to share a few opening remarks.
Oops. I don't need this box, I don't think. Thank you, Anna Maria, for that introduction, and thank you everyone that attended today. We really appreciate it, and welcome to our Easter Seals inaugural what am I looking for? The word here is Conference on Disability, yes. So thank you very much for coming. It's good to see all of you here. It's good to see some of my good friends and friends of the organization, Easter Seals, up here as well to help us out with some of the presentations that we're going to do a little bit later. A question, and if you're comfortable in raising your hands, you can answer with that. How many of you here today either live with a disability or have a family member who lives with a disability or a coworker? Yeah, that's kind of what I expected. So in Canada, about 6.2 million people live with disabilities of some kind. And I think that's huge. So persons with disabilities are more likely to experience adverse socio-economic outcomes, such as less education, poor health outcomes, and higher poverty rates. Canadians living with disabilities, even when qualified, face a higher level of unemployment equal to the general population. So these issues and challenges are real. We had a great session this morning with the speakers, the presenters. The questions were very well, very intelligent, very well pointed out, and it was a very good session. So we look forward to this afternoon as well. So why are we here? What are we doing here at this conference? Well, a conference like this is a powerful platform on which to raise a profile of a group that continues to face barriers in participation. I started here with Easter Seals in 2015, got involved to a greater extent in 2016. And we had conferences that we attended, and what I found, or what I felt at that point in time, being kind of a newbie to this particular space, was that we talked about accessibility, but a lot of the conferences that I was attending, I looked around and I didn't feel that they were inclusive. And when we talk about accessibility, we want to talk about inclusiveness as well. So inclusiveness for all people of all abilities. I've got family members, I've got close friends, I've got coworkers that all live with a disability. And to coin what Anna Maria said a minute ago, they are capable, they are dependable, they are knowledgeable, they are employable, and they are unstoppable. Together with persons with disabilities as agents of change, we're here to take action to promote stronger collaboration among organizations that support persons with disabilities, as well as the private sector and the academic institutions. And you saw those represented this morning in the breakout sessions. Since 1922, Easter Seals has been helping people living with disabilities access the equipment and the services and the programs that they need to participate fully and equally in society. We continue to advocate for a more inclusive and accessible society that acknowledges and honors the contribution and potential of Canadians with all disabilities. Easter Seals, as a member of FALA, the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance, we are proud of our contributions and applaud the federal government's passage of the Accessible Canada Act. That being said, we all know that much more work still needs to be done. And in some ways, the hard work really has just begun. And there's no single individual or no single organization or no government entity that can do it all on their own. So our hope is that the sharing and discussion held today will contribute to a multi-stakeholder collaborative action plan on creating a more inclusive, accessible, and discrimination-free society for persons with disabilities. As Easter Seals embarks on the implementation of a new strategic plan that will guide our work through our 100th anniversary coming up in a couple of years in 2022, we strive to continue realizing the powerful principles that are at the cornerstone of our mission to enhance the quality of life and self-confidence for Canadians living with disabilities. Our commitment to this principle and our passionate belief in all abilities of all people drives us to accept nothing less than continued growth, innovation, and success. I want to thank everyone today who invests in what we do. your support in making an impactful and positive difference in the lives of so many individuals and families in Canada-wide, and ensure the Easter Seals can continue to play a critical role. So all of you that attend today, we thank you because you're supporters of what we do, the people on stage here as well. We thank all of you. And I want to express my deepest gratitude to all the guest speakers that you heard this morning who work to advance the rights of persons with disabilities in communities across Canada every day. Your work is vital, not just for persons with disabilities, but indeed for all Canadians. Thank you for being here with us today and sharing your knowledge and contributing to the important discussion. I would also like to especially thank Amway Canada for being our presenting sponsor. They were going to attend and at the last minute had to back out. We value our 35-year partnership with Amway and are very grateful for them helping deliver this conference today. We thank you to our community conference sponsors, including RBC and the Future Launch, our anonymous benefactor, Magnet, Hearview, and Allegra, who had tables out there earlier today, as well as our event partners, Booster Juice. And last but not least, to the ambassadors, Easter Seals ambassadors, to the staff of Easter Seals, and the dedicated volunteers that were here today, without whom this conference would not have been possible. Your organization and your commitment to Easter Seals and what we do is truly appreciated. So I thank you, all of you here, and hope that you enjoy the rest of the afternoon as we get into the panel discussion. Thank you.
Sorry, just give me one moment here. Okay. Thank you, Dave. At this time, I would like to introduce our moderator, Maureen Haan. Maureen has been the president and CEO of the Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work since 2012. She has been involved with numerous committees and groups that increase awareness of and access for disability sector and the deaf community, including the involvement with the civil society on the UN Convention of Rights for Persons with Disabilities. She has provided leadership on the Conference on Work and Disability in Canada, the Pan-Canadian Strategy on Disability and Work, and now serves as the board member for Accessibility Standards Canada. Please join me in welcoming Maureen, who will facilitate this afternoon's panel discussion. Joining Maureen and Dave on stage, Dave, would you like to come on up? Is Mr. Bill Adair. He is the Executive Director of Spinal Cord Injury Canada. Bill has a lot of experience in the areas of health and disability. He was the founding member of the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance, known as FALA, and now serves as a board member for the Accessibility Standards Canada. Welcome, Bill. Next, we have Ms. Tina Doyle, the Director of Accessibility Services at the University of Toronto. Tina has been involved with accommodation, access, and inclusive practices in higher education for over 25 years. She currently leads the Ontario-legislated AODA Post-Secondary Standards Development Committee. Tina holds a Master's of Science in Disability Services in Higher Education and is a certified accessibility assessor. Welcome, Tina. We also have Ms. Vivian Lee, the Senior Manager, Inclusive Recruitment at RBC. In this role, Vivian designs and develops and delivers enterprise-wide inclusive recruitment strategy to help RBC build a competitive edge through attracting and attaining an inclusive workforce. Last but not least, we are delighted to also have Mr. Michael Lifshitz, co-founder and CFO of Breakaway Experiences, and founder of Illumabilities. He uses speaking engagements, comedy, and writing to not only educate people as to what people with disabilities can do, but to also inspire them to overcome their own challenges and to live their life to the fullest of their abilities. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel speakers this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Anna Maria, and hello, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's plenary session. It's my absolute honor to be here and to pose some perhaps difficult questions to our panelists, and but at the same time, really pulling on your knowledge as a group. I know that this morning everybody saw individually the incredible knowledge that you bring to this conference, but I think that pulling us all together this afternoon is a great idea. So I'm going to start actually with a question for you, Dave. We've heard a lot about issues of employment, education, income disparity, and how do you feel that they relate and intersect with each other?
Is this on? No.
I think so.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I think we get back to really the whole point of this conference, which is really trying to understand what the issues are. And so employment, education, income disparity all intersect to the fact that I think it begins with education. With education comes employment, and with solid, good employment, the change that affects the whole life, really, right, from one end of the life into the other. So I think that we look at education as the cornerstone that intersects all of those issues, the three issues that we just referred to. And at Easter Seals, we've been around since 1922. We offer summer camp, and at the summer camp, there are learning sessions. There's online learning sessions. There's employment training. We offer scholarships, skills training that I referred to, social enterprise employment, and financial assistance for equipment. So the teaching and the education that we do at our camps and at the online learning platform is the beginning of what we feel of being able to solve some of these issues of employment and the diversity of it.
Excellent. Thank you. Vivian, the next question is over to you. Oops. I think we're okay. In the latest 2017 Canadian survey on disability, it indicated that young adults and adults still face barriers and challenges in securing meaningful paid employment, whatever their field may be, despite having the necessary qualifications. And so what do you feel is being done to address this, and what more can be done from a business perspective?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, I feel the most effective way is go back to the schools, because a lot of youth who have disabilities and they face barrier, they're already at a disadvantage at the starting line. Means when they get out of school, the other students might already have multiple internships under their resume, but the student with disabilities, because of the barriers they're facing, a lot of times they don't have the opportunity to get meaningful internship or call-ups. So what we have been focusing on in RBC is RBC hires over 1,000 students every year. So we want to make sure a certain percentage of the interns we offer are for students with visible or invisible disabilities. We also encourage our hiring managers to consider students with visible or invisible disabilities. In that way, when they graduate, they will have a very good resume and make them very, very competitive in the market. So that's what we're doing, and we also encourage all the employers to start with students at school. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Michael, I'm going to jump over to you now and talk about alternative forms of employment or income generation. And maybe you can talk about how people with disabilities are able to really harness work as an entrepreneur in the gig economy, social enterprises.
Thank you, Maureen, for the question. So I think entrepreneurship presents an interesting opportunity for people with disabilities because of the fact, subject to having to meet deliverables to clients and what they expect, you kind of can make your own schedule. So particularly if we're talking about a disability where there may be good days or bad days, you can kind of work around, work a little bit more on the good days, and if you're having a bad day, then perhaps you work a little bit less. So there is that flexibility. So we could be talking something as, if you want to consider it, a side business, so that it's just, at the very least, because we talk about income disparity, at the very least, if you had a side business, even if you can only work a little bit, you at least get a little bit of extra income to have to kind of close that income gap. So I think there's that opportunity. It could be technology, computer-based business, even getting a blog and using affiliate marketing to generate revenue. So there's different opportunities along that you can kind of tailor depending on how long or how many hours you're able to work in a week. And then that way it's kind of create your own job, right? So.
And if I have a follow-up question for that, and that is, what kind of supports are out there for people with disabilities who want to set up their own shop?
So I know there is a program, and I think in different provinces it's called different programs, but there is an opportunity fund, which I believe the criteria is that if you're under 40 and looking to start a business, they will help provide up to 50% of the funding. Excellent. Now, of course, the challenge behind that is having the other 50%, because if you're talking about someone who, and that becomes kind of that vicious circle, we're trying to start a business to cure income disparity, but we don't have the money to start the business, but there is that option. And sometimes it's just something that you can start that's a little bit on the small side. There's a lot of incubator programs that you can apply to, and that will help provide mentorship and encouragement and also accountability. So you have someone who's going to help you move along and maybe give you the steps if you're not exactly sure how to get started. So anyone interested in that, I would definitely encourage checking out one of the incubator programs.
Excellent. Thank you. My next question is for Bill. Bill, this morning you talked about how the Accessible Canada Act is going to address and advance areas, and I'd like you to, maybe you can talk a little bit more about that around employment, education, and income disparity for people with living with disabilities. And the second part to that is, what is the role for other organizations, either in the private, in the public, or civic sector, to help advance the Accessible Canada Act?
Thanks, Maureen. 4 things to say about this. The first one, what difference is the Accessible Canada Act going to make? So the first thing the government's committed to is hiring 5,000 people with disabilities into jobs in the federal government. It's a big deal. So people will have jobs. They may not have had jobs before. They have additional income that they can spend, and so on. So that's leading by example. The second is the Accessibility Standards Canada organization is writing a new standard on employment. So these are the rules. These are what organizations have to do to ensure that they are providing access and inclusion around employment. So the call to action here is for the private sector and the public sector and people in this room to get involved with Accessibility Standards Canada, be a part of writing this standard, and be a part of reviewing the standard. So to get connected, you can write to the organization and ask to be put on a mailing list, and that way you'll be kept informed of opportunities such as this. So the standards, writing a standard on employment is going to set the rules for everybody that can be followed. Then the fourth one is lead by example. So our colleague, we're looking at a colleague at the Royal Bank who understands the competitive advantage of a community made up of 6.2 million people in our country, and hiring people with disabilities into your workforce is going to put a shadow over some of the other banks. So congratulations, lead by example. And colleges and universities, in terms of post-secondary education, make your programs accessible. Welcome people with a variety of different disabilities in, celebrate their success, launch them into fabulous careers.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Dave, do you have something to add to that?
I do, thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on what Bill says, talking about RBC, I think that it's also incumbent upon us as advocacy organizations or organizations that try to make lives better for people with different abilities. And I think as we collaborate together and become speaking with one voice, I think somebody mentioned this morning, speaking with one voice and applying pressure on some of our corporate sponsors, a little bit, I think, on government who's trying to lead the way, and hire more people who live with disabilities and make the point, prove the point that just because a person has either a visible or invisible disability does not make them any less important or less productive or more costly. I think that we as organizations can push that point as well.
Good, thank you. Excellent. Tina, I have my next questions directed to you. So, assuming that there is a desire or a purposeful intent to include people with disabilities in schools, and I'm going to ask the same question for the workplace to Vivian, so Vivian, you have to pay attention, even though it's not your question yet, are there any structural or systemic issues, barriers, limitations, or considerations that businesses and organizations, educational entities, really struggle to overcome? Like, what are those areas, and then how can they barriers, and how can they be addressed? So I have, for example, we talk about limited resources, and then we talk about, what about an open work environment, which is the standard for today, but for a potential employee that has an invisible disability who is not able to function well in that open workspace. So first, maybe we can talk about the barriers and some suggestions from the educational perspective, and then maybe we can flip over to employment.
Sure. Okay, well, I think before the institutions can address the barriers, we really need to understand what are the barriers. And that is actually the purpose of the AODA Education Standards Committees. There's been consultation with the community to find out what are the barriers. And we know that barriers are attitudinal awareness, curriculum design, the built environment, accessible buildings, technology, and what we're using in the classroom, and then also students having access to social life on the campuses. Because we want students to not just get in the door, and I said this in my presentation, we want them to not just get in the door, we want them to feel like they belong on the campuses and that they are part of the community. So I think those are definite barriers that need to be addressed, and I think to address the barriers, everybody needs to take responsibility. So it's actions through the government, through the institutions, through employers, and community service providers. It's important that we educate ourselves, that we listen to the voices of people with disabilities, that we are considering the barriers when we're developing policies, programs, practices, structures, and including curriculum design, so that we stop creating barriers and instead we are preventing them through creating an accessible space. We also need to, education sectors, and I say K-12, post-secondary, I think need to see that we have a role in preparing students for the workplace and helping them prepare for that transition. And so looking at that piece, I think, is important. And And so what I'm seeing more and more at post-secondary institutions, in particular universities, because I think we've done it less than the colleges, is creating experiential learning opportunities. And the government has, we have something called strategic mandate agreements with the universities and the government, and the expectation is to provide experiential learning opportunities. I think that's important to give the students opportunities. I also think partnerships and collaborations with community agencies, so I think there's many of you here, is thinking about what role you can have with the education sector and how can you support the education sector in terms of educating us. And also, it's a resource issue for everyone, right? And so I think also when you partner with institutions and collaborate, it helps the students feel more comfortable to come to your agency because they've already met you or they've learned about the agencies. And finally, I think at the end of the day, we need to hear voices. Everyone needs to speak up. And I think similar to what you were just saying, Bill, around the Accessible Canada Act and giving feedback, the same, I think, applies in Ontario, and then if other provinces follow, and I've seen more provinces follow in terms of the accessible standards, is we release, the government releases recommendations to remove barriers, and they're asking the community for feedback, and then they review standards. And I think it's so important that even though we're really busy, is to stop and take a look at what is coming out from the government so that we can have a voice and speak up and respond to the recommendations that are coming down. Because I think, and ensuring that voices of people with disabilities is included in that feedback is important.
Thank you very much. I have had the honor of listening to Minister Qualtrough talk quite often, and she has taken the UN Nothing About Us Without Us and changed it into Nothing Without Us. And so I think that that's quite what you're talking about there as well. So thank you. Vivian, from the employer perspective and the workplace perspective?
Yeah, so I want to continue the topic of the voice because I feel I work with different diversity groups, women, visible minorities, newcomers to Canada, LGBT, Indigenous, and people with disabilities. Among all the groups, I feel, of course, people with disabilities and Indigenous peoples of Canada, we have the most challenges, which means that these two groups need to be heard most. Right, but in reality, it's not the case. So I think everybody in the room, we all have the responsibility to raise that awareness of, the importance of disability inclusion, both in the employment and the whole society, and also across Canada. And what we do is we look at the barriers from when we are designing a job description. What are the must-haves? Are we building too many must-haves in our job description that eliminate or just unconsciously eliminated some potential very capable candidates after the door before they even apply? They don't even think about applying because we listed so many 10 years of experience in this field, and maybe some candidate can be only having 5 years of experience, so they won't apply, but they can be totally capable. So we look at the job description, we look at the shortlisting, how do we screen the resumes, look at the student resume, why there's a year that's missing in graduate maybe a year later, maybe he's taking time off to take care of his well-being. So we need to be mindful of those challenges that people are facing and still put them on the level playing field. And then in the interview phase, of course, we use people with autism in our last session, that people with autism do not succeed in interview. So what are the potential accommodation we need to provide to them to help them overcome the barrier? So a lot of systematic barriers, we know that in the employment field that we need to be more aware of, first as people who work in the field, and then educate our employers and hiring managers.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I hear that all the time in the work that we do at CCRW. It's about the talent. We have to focus on the talent and not necessarily on all of the as you say, the nice to haves, as opposed to really what the crux of the job is. So I'm going to open it up a little bit. I've got a couple of more questions, and then we're going to turn it over to the floor. But I would like to have everybody's perspective on the next couple of questions, and that is, and Vivian, you've already touched on it, but the intersectionality of us as Canadians is huge. We have so many. We identify as so many different. We have so many different identities wrapped up into our one person or one people, and how I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit about how all of those issues that we're talking about. We're talking about the employment, education, income disparity, and how do they impact when we're talking about intersectionality, women, Indigenous, visible, ethnic communities, LGBTQ, all the other groups that that are represented here today. And so what are some of the changes that we can, so if you can talk about the impact of that in your expertise, but also what are some of the changes that we can make at individual and therefore systemic levels to help make that difference? And it's really a very easy question, as you can see. So, and if we crack this one, we're golden.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes, I can repeat that question.
No, I'm joking. It's okay.
I know, I'm teasing as well. Go ahead, Tina.
I'll start
please.
with it.
Thank you.
So one of the things I think is that we need to recognize that there's a compounded disadvantage when we have multiple identities. And it can directly impact how people with disabilities seek services, accept services, and how they engage with accommodations, for example. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand our communities. And when we're structuring our service is to think of them as a whole person and providing a holistic service delivery so that you understand, that sometimes there's cultural barriers, for example, with a student accepting that they are a person with a disability, for example. So I think just understanding the whole person can impact how you deliver service and how you talk about your service so that they feel comfortable coming in and using the services.
Thank you. Absolutely. Go ahead, Michael.
I think, so as Tina was saying about the whole person, I think it's important to remember, as someone with a disability, we are more than just someone with a disability, be it a member of a particular religious group, social group, sexual orientation, whatever the case may be. And so for Illumabilities, my tagline is shining light on abilities. So what I would say is key is instead of looking at who the person is and what box they fit into, looking at it from the perspective of what abilities and talents do they bring to the table. And I think often being part of a group that, for lack of a better word, a disadvantaged or a marginalized group, I think, so I actually have a joke that I use in my comedy routine that I don't believe in racism or prejudice because I grew up as a disabled Anglo Jewish person living in Quebec, so I need all the friends I can get. But I think it's really a question of, like I said, who is the person at the core, not what group are they part of. And I think if we do that, you can really find some remarkable talents, because I think the more diverse your group is, the more interesting solutions you're going to find, because we all have different cultural backgrounds, different lived experiences that is going to help come up with a better solution than if we're just a bunch of people from one group sitting around the table, right? So, yeah.
Excellent. Can I just add one more thing?
Of course, absolutely.
I think it's important that we're reaching out to those communities too, right? So that reaching out and creating pathways to education and employment, I think will make a difference in terms of those communities, us seeing we need more diverse workplaces, so we need diversity in the schools. And I think if the communities better understand what they're getting into, what they're going to come to, and and we understand their needs, it kind of helps create that bridge.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
Yes,
just want to
please,
comment
Dave.
on that too, because I
Yep.
totally agree with both what Michael said and Lisa here, because when I came on board with Easter Seals, so let's just say historically, Easter Seals has done a very good job of recognizing the community that we live in terms of disabilities being represented on the board level, because we need that lens, we need that perspective in our decision-making at the board level. What we admittedly have not done well historically is having representation from at the employment level. We have not been very good at hiring representation from the community. So at Easter Seals now, I'm really happy to say in terms of employment, 30% of the staff at Easter Seals Canada all identify with being somebody who lives with a disability. And yes, there's been some accommodations made, and happily so, but we have a great team and a great work atmosphere. It's very productive and hardworking, and it's just a great culture. So that change has been made recently in the last couple of years. But that's, I guess, what Bill was saying earlier. You've got to walk the talk, or you have to lead by example. That's what we try to do.
Thank you. Vivian, yeah?
Yeah, so a funny story to share, because RBC is Canada-based, but we're also global, right? So as we're thinking about promoting our diversity, different initiatives globally, actually disability and women are the only two categories that are global. Because, say, LGBT in some countries are illegal, which is hugely offensive, but it is the reality, right? And the disability is the only common topic that anybody can relate to. And if I think about it, any company, organization wants to build inclusion practice. If you start with disability inclusion, your inclusion is 50% there already. Because if you think about the product design, I have my the universal design lead, Alicia, here in the audience. If you think about a product and you design for someone with disability, then everybody else can benefit. And the same is with inclusion practice. If you really start with someone who has a disability or disability inclusion, then you are including a lot of other biases. Take those blind spots into consideration. And as a result of that, our campus team, they go to different campuses and have the RBC Day, and they're trying to choose a diversity topic that can relate to everybody. So what ended up that they decided to choose is mental health. So that's the only common topic that everybody can relate to. So that shows how important disability is, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Bill?
Let's get to the audience.
Oh, no, we've got a few more questions here. Yeah. We're going to stay here for a little bit. That's okay. Stay with me, Bill.
Want me to comment on this?
Yep.
Yeah, I think
intersectionality and the ACA.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I think the points I would want to make, the point I would want to make is already been raised, which is the importance of reaching out to various communities. What about people living on the streets? What about people in prisons? And the enormous barriers that they face, and sometimes need an extra helping hand to get to seeing what the skills and the talents are, so we can shine that light on them and to get them to come out of hiding, so to speak, and to be brave enough to join the community. So creating a safe environment and a welcoming environment, extremely important, not just accessible.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So my next question is actually a two-parter. So we're going to split it in two, and I'm going to pose it to the entire panel again. The first one is, what do you think the most critical changes we would want to make over the next 5 years should be? And not the call to action, because that's my next question, so don't answer that. Just where are, what are the most critical changes we want to make over the next 5 years? And what is the large picture? What do we envision as the large picture for the outcome from those changes? And Bill, you have the microphone.
I think one of the top priority is employment. and creating a strategy for the country. We've created it, implementing a strategy for the country where people with disabilities are hired, where their talents are uncovered and they're applied. This is one of the most important things that we can do to address poverty, to address inclusion. So that would be my number one topic that we should be looking at as a country.
Thank you. Michael?
I think one thing I would like to see is governments, and I say governments not in reference to any particular party, but governments in the general sense at every level, looking at people, investing in people with disabilities as an investment, not as a cost. And what I mean by that is, as a very simple example, if you go look on the assistive device program under the Ontario government website, it specifically says they will not pay for any equipment if it is exclusively necessary for work. So when I moved from Quebec to Ontario and got my Ontario wheelchair, because that would be my other thing, if we could have a national program for devices, so if you move from Montreal to Ottawa, you don't have to start being reassessed, because, spoiler alert, you don't magically get cured by moving 200 kilometers. I need the same wheelchair in Montreal as I do in Ottawa. The important thing is I'm not bitter, though. But I think really it's about, and I was shocked because the wheelchair, the person came to assess and they're like, we need to see you use it in your house. And I'm like, well, in my house, I don't really need it. It's more to go out and work. And they're like, yeah, the government doesn't care about that. And I'm like, that is ludicrous. Because in my mind, it would make more sense. In Quebec, there's a program that they'll pay to adapt a vehicle so that I can get in and out of my vehicle and drive. And I can actually show the math. Putting aside the moral issue, I can show the math that I saved them money by them giving me a van and me being able to go out, earn an income, pay taxes, go out, spend money, all that kind of stuff. So I think the big thing would be looking at it from the point of view of, I'm going to give people the tools they need to be able to go and live to the fullest of their abilities and contribute to the fullest of their abilities and be unstoppable. I threw that in. There you go. Yeah, I think that would be my big thing.
Thank you, Michael. I will say, I just wanted to add on to something, because when you were talking, there's a statistic from the States that says that 95% of workplace adjustments were made for people without disabilities. So we already know how to do it. Like, it's not rocket science, but for some reason there seems to be a barrier to get over that. So when you're talking about for all people, I think that that's very applicable. Is there, Dave, did you want to jump in?
Sure, just one quick thing. Bill mentioned employment, and of course I think that's the big thing that's going to make the largest difference in a person's life. But I think that access to education and funding for education maybe takes a step just ahead of the access to employment. I'd also like to see more people living with disabilities, not only in corporate offices, but in the government. And I have to say that, having spent some time in Ottawa in the last couple of years, they have made a real push in getting qualified people living with disabilities, working in their offices and support. So that's also very good to see. And the last thing I would like to see is more to have an accessibility mindset in the design of new buildings. I do have a concern about the AODA and this, Bill C-81 now, just about retrofitting buildings. I think that is going to be a hard one to push through. Just having been a business owner and the cost that's involved in that, I think that's going to be difficult without the act itself or the law having any teeth in it. So if we can start with the buildings, and all you got to do is look in Toronto, look at the cranes, look at all the construction that's going on here, and are we looking at something that is really starting with and to be looked at through the lens of accessibility? It's something I'd like to see greater.
Thank you. And I'm going to add on to that as well to say that accessibility in a building is more than just a button on a door, and so it has to be for all levels of disability as well. So thank you, Dave. Vivian,
Okay, so
you're on.
Okay, so we talked about the employment and the education. I'm going to touch on the accessible transit system because I feel that if you don't have an accessible transit system, people from marginalized community are declined of employment. That is it, period, right? And it's not only for people on wheelchair, but also people from, say, the intersectional LGBT community, indigenous, and people who cannot afford to live in downtown core Toronto. You have to build a accessible transit system. So Toronto to Montreal, 6 hours or train ride, that's not accessible. That's 20 years old behind the current, behind China at least. So we need to build the accessible transit system. That's the top priority, I think, for society.
Thank you. And Vivian, anything to add?
Me?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Tina.
It's
Sorry.
okay.
Sorry.
I feel no pressure being part of the education sector here. That keeps coming up. But I agree, actually, that education is key. That we know the stats show that our students with disabilities graduating, even if they have a degree or diploma, are still underemployed compared to their peers. And so we know education is really key for the employment sector. So I think over the next 5 years, I'd like to, and I know for certainly in Ontario, and I know that we have people, maybe not Ontario, watching, but, I think we can all learn from each other, other provinces and other countries, and what we're doing around accessibility. But I think over the next 5 years, I'd like to see changes in terms of how we're looking at education, and that we need to help students transition from right through K to 12 to post-secondary to employment, and that we need to figure out what's the barriers for the students so that we can address them. So that's my hope over the next 5 years, that we'll see more changes. I certainly am seeing shifts, so that's really good. I am seeing a shift in the conversation. So.
Thank you. You have one more thing to add, Bill? And then I've got one last question for the panel.
Quick one. Michael, you mentioned something earlier in your comment on this question that I just wanted to pick up on and emphasize, and that is, so if I were to go back and answer or offer a second area for a priority, attitudes. You got great laws, you got lousy attitudes, you're going to have resistance. You got right attitudes and crummy laws, you're going to advance access and inclusion. So how do we get society to stop looking at us as welfare cases and as charities, and look at us as an investment in strengthening our society socially and economically?
Very good.
I just want to add something to what Bill is saying here. And somebody this morning said, speaking with one voice. I think in the last couple of years, as long as I've been in this space, I've seen a much greater collaborative effort between charity organizations, and I still think that there's room to move in that. I think there's still some divides and some rifts that need to be conquered, they need to be dealt with, and I think the more that we speak with one voice and have a purpose, the stronger we're going to be, and the stronger the message is going to be, and I think that the quicker we can get action and the more results that we'll see. Just want to put that out there.
Excellent, thank you. So my very last question for my last question, but I hope it's not the last question, because I hope while we've been talking, you've been thinking, and you've been inspired to ask some of your own questions. My last question to the panel is, what is your call to action for the people in this room, for the people who are watching? What's the message that we need to take away from today to ensure that the momentum that has been caused by this conference today and this gathering, the people who are all in this room, what is it that we can do to make sure that we continue so that in 5 years we do have the visions that you've already outlined for us?
I'll just really quickly say that the only way we're going to change culture is for everybody to take responsibility, and that we can't point fingers and say that the government's not doing enough, because government needs to do more, institutions need to do more. We all collectively have a responsibility in creating an inclusive society. And so I think we need to look at what roles we play so that we can contribute to advocating for those changes. And they might be small changes in our community to larger ones that could be, Canada-wide. But I think we all play a role, and I think it's important we reflect on what we can do.
Thank you.
I think also if we can keep the energy that has begun, the work that's begun, and keep it rolling. If you look just on what we have on the stage, we've got lived experience, we've got charitable organization, we've got education, we've got corporate Canada. I think that things are starting to roll, and if we keep this going with greater energy and greater frequency, and again speak, as I said earlier, with one voice, then I think we have something that will be listened to. Again, Bill said this morning, we can't leave it to government. It's going to be up to people who have the lived experience, or people who live with disabilities, in conjunction with the charitable organizations that advocate for the community. Together, keep that rolling and make big things happen. And don't give up, don't quit. I know there's days that you seem like you're not doing anything, or at least I feel that way. I have to sit back and measure, what have I really accomplished? And sometimes it's not anything that's very measurable, and that's kind of depressing. But you just got to keep going, keep pushing, and keep rolling. That one voice is important.
Thank you. Vivian?
So among all the banks, RBC, TD, BMO, Scotia, we actually get together quarterly, every few months. We share best practices. So I think even though we're competitors in the market, in this topic, on the topic of person with disabilities, we sometimes even share candidates. Hey, I have a good candidate, and I don't currently have a role open. Do you have a role in your organization? We even do that. So I would definitely encourage all the employers to come together and share best practices. And that's going to help us move this topic and this challenge forward. Yep.
Thank you. That's excellent. Michael, you have the last word on this question.
So.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Bill has the last word.
Oh.
You can have the last word.
Do you want the very last word or the second last word?
I'll go for second last
Okay.
words. So this is the typical Canadian conversation. No, you go, please. No, sorry, you go. So what I would like to do as a challenge to every person in this room is think to yourself how you can make things more accessible in your own world, be it work, if you're hiring someone, whatever the case may be. I'm going to share two very fast stories. So I had reached out, a woman was hosting a networking event at a bar in Ottawa, and I noticed that it was a room upstairs. And I reached out to her and I said, the pub that you're doing it at, they have a room in the back. And if you did it in a room in the back, it would be accessible to people in wheelchairs. And then that way you don't have to go upstairs. And she wrote back and I think the key point here is, I didn't call her out in the event, right? I didn't post in the Facebook event, you're a horrible person. I gently sent her a message to ask her to consider it, and she said, oh, I didn't think about that. So I think if we think about it in our own life when we're doing events, and an example of that, so I've actually, if anyone noticed the sign on the back of my wheelchair, because I do rolling advertisements, so I've actually recently started a comedy show in Montreal, which is in Ottawa, which is the only wheelchair accessible open mic in Ottawa. So if somebody can't get out of their wheelchair, they could actually come and perform. And once I got the wheelchair accessible, I said, can we do better? So I've actually reached out to a group of interpreters, and as of, I believe, mid-April, we're going to have ASL translation at all shows, which I think is going to, and so there's voting cards in it. We're actually looking into getting Braille printed on the voting card so they can tell what color the side is. So I think it's being cognizant, and when we're looking, I know Dave mentioned the accessibility lens, when you're doing an event, when you're working, whatever it is you're doing, think about how you can be more accessible. That would be my challenge for everyone.
Thank you. And that was an excellent second last comment.
Thank you.
Bill.
Very practical, kind of easy. write to the CEO of Accessibility Standards Canada. Look it up, you can find it online. Write to him and say, would you please put me on your mailing list? I want to know what you're doing. And watch what the organization is doing, look for opportunities to get involved, and if you don't think we're moving fast enough, or if you think we're off track, stick our feet in the fire and push us.
Excellent. Thank you. So thank you very much. Those are all the questions that I have. But I'm sure that there's lots of questions from the room. Oh, you okay, Bill?
Okay.
And so, Anna Maria, I'm going to turn it over to you to moderate from the floor.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. So we're going to take a few questions from the floor. I have a hand up here. So, sir, can you just state your name?
Hi, my name is Wayne Henschel. I'm a person with a disability. I also work for the CNIB. I applaud the panel and the conference overall. I like the movement that we're all doing collectively together. I like the focus on youth and education. I would just pose to the panel that we are in an aging population within Canada as well. So those of us where the disability happens as we gently age, and I fall into that category, I just want to make sure that we're not forgetting about those folks, because we are so similar to, I believe it was Michael that called out that says, I can't see you all up there, so I don't know which background you all are from. In my background, you're just voices and names. So to me, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm an individual that is bringing my skills to the table, but I'm also 48 years old. So I'm not ready to retire. I don't want to retire. I want to go challenge the next. And there's many others like me out there that aren't necessarily students, graduates coming out. So what are we looking at to support that aging population as well as encouraging our youth? Is my question.
Is your question directed to anyone in particular, or?
Does anybody want to take that?
I would say I'll put it to the panel.
Over to the panel. Who would like to start?
Excellent. Dave?
Yeah, very good question, and I'll take that, so thank you very much. I am part of that older generation myself. I know you can't see me, but so I totally understand what you're talking about. I think as we all age, it's just automatically that we become people living with disabilities. It's just part of the aging process. And of course, depending on how hard we live when we're younger, it's to either a lesser or greater degree. I want to relate to that because, or reply to that, because at Easter Seals, we kind of bumped into this idea of elderly people needing more supports. And I know we know the aging population and all of that, but we have a program that's called Access To, which is really a sort of an entertainment card that's largely with Cineplex Odeon. And up until, just recently, just the last couple of years, it was all really targeted towards younger people. So really 28 years of age and younger. And we're noticing the last couple of years that it's now skewed so that about 35% of the applications are now for people living with disabilities. So it's something that, again, we bumped into it, and we're just starting to recognize it. And each community, each province and each community is different in terms of the programs and services they provide, because each community is unique and it has its own unique and diverse requirements. So that's something that we are now aware of, now paying attention to, and tracking it to see what it is that we can do to help those people, elderly people living with disabilities. And I think actually we have some representatives from our Ontario office here, and I know that they, with some of their programs, already deal largely with the elderly population. So it's a good question, and it's just beginning. It's just hit our radar. So
thank you.
Be patient.
Thank you. We have another question. There's a mic. Yep. Perfect.
Hi. Related to the previous question, I like to, it's Yin Brown here. Hi, Wayne. Succession plan. We talked a lot about recruitment, hiring, retention, not as much on succession. So what are the succession strategies that you know of in your own organization, or even for your own role at your own, like, we all move on sooner or later. What are the succession plans that are inclusive of people with disabilities? So we're not talking about new hires. We're talking about people who are already in your organizations or people who have work experience. But, we never get to be CEOs.
Thank you. Thank you, Yin. I'm not sure who would like to talk about a succession plan.
I can
Vivian,
try.
Probably
I
best.
think it's more of a career development and career advancement versus just succession, because succession is only for senior executives, right? But the interesting fact I'd like to share with everybody is we recently did a data analysis on all the different levels of employees with disability. And guess which group has the highest representation? Our executives. We have 25% of our executives have disclosed of having a disability. And if you really think about it, it is the reality, because they are more on the aging population side. On the other hand, maybe they have worked so hard and they experience a lot, and maybe a lot of challenges along the way, right? So I think and that is sometimes not a bad thing, because every time I have, disability inclusion events, a lot of our executives volunteer their time to do the keynote, because they want to share their support and share their commitment. So I think we can turn that challenge into an opportunity, engage the executives, and make them become the diversity or disability inclusion champions. And we can find a lot of them, because 20% of the executives apparently have a disability. Yeah, so maybe we can start from there.
Excellent. Thank you. Are we going over here?
Do we have another question on this side here?
Did we have? So,
Maureen, will you be able to relay the question?
So I'm going to relay the question. Unfortunately, we don't have interpreters. Yeah, we don't have interpreters here. I'm fluent in sign language, but I'm not a sign language interpreter, as Gary knows. And so he's going to be very gentle with me while he's going to sign away his question, and I'm going to tell you what it is that he's saying. So first of all, today the technology has been very amazing, and it's been exciting to see. And the number of people with disabilities on welfare, we notice has increased. And as far as age is concerned, for people with disabilities, they're forced to retire because of their disability. In their 40s and 50s is what we're finding. And isn't that amazing? The job availability in all level of governments is really downsized now. There's not very many. It's another incredible story. And all the businesses, the employers, they've found cheaper ways to outsource part-time employers, contracts, without benefits. And that's another incredible story, isn't it? So I'm asking the panel, do you have any other wonderful stories for us?
Thank you very much for that question.
I actually don't know what to say to that one, except, if we look around this room, technology is a great thing, but I think that it is putting certain people out of work. I think we look around this room, we had twice as many people signed up for this event today because of the coronavirus. I believe that's part of it, that some of those people didn't want to come out and take a chance with the coronavirus. I think you look at the markets in the last couple of weeks and you see what's going on in the stock markets and earnings and layoffs already because of this. This is a global issue, and I wish I had a magic panacea, something that we could throw out there and say that everything was going to be fixed. But I don't think that there is anything magic. I think it's going to be a lot of hard work. I think it's going to take the ability to be flexible and, and change some of the things that we do in industries, even in the charitable industry, I think, could be a tough year. So I don't really have any good stories. We just have to stay with it and stay positive and keep working and, as they say, kind of fight the good fight and keep pushing forward and do the best that we can. I wish I had better news.
Yeah.
I would say that I think everyone in this room has a story. But I think I do see change. And I think we need to keep pushing the government and our institutions to do better. But I don't think it's overnight. But I've been doing this work I've been working with people with disabilities for over 30 years. I'm aging too. So I'm older than you, the person from CNIB, because you can't see me. And so, there's still so much we need to do. And I hope by the time I retire, we see more change. But I think we need to acknowledge what the problems are. If we're going to pretend that there aren't problems, nothing's going to change. So by addressing that there are problems, that these are the barriers, and we need to take specific action to address the barriers. And I think that's how we move forward. And there's no question from the beginning of my work to now, there's been improvement. Has there been improvement as fast as I would like? No. Society has moved slowly. But I think there's hope for the future. It just unfortunately is taking longer than we would like.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anna Maria?
Yes, thank you, Maureen. We have a number of questions coming online, so I'd like to provide this question on behalf of Jan, one of our online viewers, and this is to the panel. In light of how to support students either looking for co-op or jobs, how can we make attendance supports easier to access and more fluid between organizations and agencies to make this support less of a barrier?
You said something and I missed something.
Okay, I'll repeat the question. So, in light of the support for students either looking for co-op or jobs, how can we make attendance supports easier to access and more fluid between agencies in order to make this support less of a barrier?
Attendant care. So the question is about attendant care for people with physical disabilities. That's the piece I missed. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm processing the question. Does anyone? I think the agencies need to be talking to each other. Government needs to be talking to each other. And I think if there's silos, then those are barriers. I think attendant care is a problem. There's no question. There's not enough. There's not enough. So that you can't spontaneously say, hey, I'm going to the pub with my friends. And there's a lot of organizing to do with attendant care. So, I can just say that we need to have more communication with our agencies. And the government needs to hear that that's a problem. I don't know if I missed the whole question.
Thank you. On behalf of Jan, our online viewer, thank you very much. Are there any other questions on the floor?
Over here.
Hi, my name is Matthew Dever. I'm an autistic adult. I'm a director with Autism Advocacy Ontario. There's a lot of talk that's happened on accessibility and accommodations and inclusion, and I find it generally it's in an urban and suburban context. And I'm wondering how we deal with the other intersection that we haven't talked about, is how do we deal with accessibility in a northern, rural, and remote communities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Bill, is that something that you feel that you can address?
Yeah, it's an excellent question and a critical issue to be looked at, and that is something that we have been speaking with Accessibility Standards Canada and the Human Rights Commission about how do we reach into communities which are rural and isolated communities, so fly-in communities, for example. Yeah, I don't have a solution to it other than oftentimes those communities are left out. People in those communities are not, their voices are not heard, and that's just not okay.
Thank you.
Not a good answer, not a solution, but feeling your pain and needing to. I mean, this is a good example of an opinion and an insight that you could bring to Accessibility Standards Canada in relation to, for example, writing the employment standards. So what does it have to do with employment in a small community? Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the floor, ladies and gentlemen? We do have one question, again, from our online viewers, from David. Given that much social inclusion is built through sport, what incentives can employers introduce or offer to engage people with disabilities? And that's from our online viewer, David.
Maybe Vivian as our
resident employer.
The employer on the panel, perhaps. That's a good question for you.
My specialty is actually in recruitment. Now we're trying to move to the employee engagement, right? I think we just need to raise more awareness that the percentage of employees with disability is way more than we think. Someone might participate a sport or any company-wide activity, and we do not even realize that that person has a disability. I think sharing success stories and even like a company like RBC to support sponsor some events. Like I think we used to go to, when I first joined, we used to go to the blind hockey. We support blind hockey. And activities like that. And another thing that's a few years ago, our technology group, we encourage our executives to have a wheelchair day. And we also challenge them. We bring the organization that specializes on wheelchair basketball. So we invite them and try to teach our executives not only to sit in a wheelchair and maybe learn some basketball skills on the wheelchair. So when the executives become the champions of the disability inclusion, it is much easier for us to reach the awareness among our employees and promote activities like that.
Thank you. I'm also aware, maybe I can jump in as well with this. I'm aware of an organization that does sledge hockey. So it's a team building experience for and there is a question over here in the back. There is to do sledge hockey for a team building experience, and also to get that experience of understanding what it's like to be on the ice and in a sledge hockey, in a sled. But I will say also, and I'm just adding on to this, is one of the things that that businesses constantly tell us at CCRW is that disability isn't a day in the lobby. It's not a day to be celebrated once a year, and woohoo, aren't we great? It's an ongoing process, and it's an ongoing learning and growing period. And so while it's very important to answer the person online, it's very important to have those understandings and use sport in that type of a way. But we have to be a little bit careful not to trivialize, and a little bit careful not to further. Yes, I'll leave it there. But thank you for that. And I think that there's another question over here.
I was just going to comment before we do. I just want to comment because it goes back to what Michael said earlier about event planning. That if employers are planning events, is thinking about how they can include their employees. Yeah. A lot of businesses do golfing. So, how can we ensure that the employees with disabilities can be included in the activities? So it needs to be thought about in advance.
Thank you.
Hello. 3 points I'd like to make if I can. I'll try to be really, really brief because I know there are people here. Number one, when it comes to employees or people with disabilities working, I've just been talking with a major charity. I've been talking with them for years. I finally got them to see the light. They're gonna, because I use mobility scooters, okay? Number one with mobility scooters, there's a lot of problems with them. So I've invented things to make them different. These guys are finally gonna officially endorse it. I wanna make them here. I wanna hire people with disabilities to make them, wanna make them in Canada. Now with slave labor in China, semi-slave labor over here. Number one, if you wanna do that. Number two, this scooter, that scooter, every wheelchair, every baby carriage, every baby stroller, every e-bike, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all black. They all need to be fluorescent, glow in the dark, reflective. They need to have flashing lights so you can see us coming. They need to make noise so you can see us coming, hear us coming. And they need to back up. When they back up, just like trucks and they make a special noise, they need that for everybody because nobody can see me over here. So when we talk about disabilities, they can't see you. That's number two. Number three, when I got my MS, no one told me that I should go and apply for housing. No one told me I should do this. No one told me I should do that. There is not one website that says disability.ca/GTA. Now you have a disability. What disability do you have? Is it MS? Is it Parkinson's? Is it this? Is it that? What do you do next? Here are the government services available. Here are these services. It doesn't exist. I've said this till I was blue in the face, and everyone says that's a great idea. Somebody please do it. Somebody be an advocate for all these products. Whenever you guys go to Canadian Tire, or you go to Walmart, or you go to a mall, guess what? The doors open automatically. Why do over here I got to push a button to get the door open, and it swings open rather than disappear slides over?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Well, I appreciate your comment, and I believe that everybody in the room here heard your comment as well. And hopefully there is somebody that will be able to pick up your challenge and work with you to make sure that this happens. So thank you very much.
Great. I want to comment on housing.
Yes, please. Housing is very important.
I want to comment on housing because I think it's a major problem that there's not enough accessible housing. So they build, for example, bungalows, but then there's steps up to the bungalow. And so then we're seeing students with disabilities not being able to leave their home because they can't find somewhere else. And it affects mobility for jobs because people need to find a place to live. So I do think this is something that needs to be addressed. And for the housing that does exist, if there's like applications, which I had to help my parents. So my parents both had disabilities. So when my mom they needed to move into an accessible apartment, and then they were on a waiting list for 3 years, right? And so I think this is a problem that we need them to be able to, we need people with disabilities to have that access to accessible housing.
Thank you. Sorry, of course, that was one of your very important points. And Michael?
I just wanted to comment on the gentleman's points. One thing I would add to your thing about reflectors, a very handy thing. So there's devices that you can plug in to the battery charge outlet in your wheelchair in order to be, and then you plug using a USB cable to charge your cell phone. Very handy. So if you're out and your battery dies and you need that to call adapted transportation, a taxi, you can plug into your wheelchair. I know when we had the tornadoes in Ottawa, I was without power for 48 hours. I managed to stay connected by charging, because I live on the 3rd floor, so a fully charged wheelchair doesn't do me any good, whereas a charged telephone is a lot more useful. The one other thing I would mention, your point about disability.ca, 110%, because as I shared this morning, so I wear an artificial leg. So there's Moram Child Amputee program. There's 2 components, right? Child and amputee. I was both, and I didn't find out about the program until I was 12 years old, and we had to tell the place that I went to get my leg fitted about the program, and they're like, wow, that's a good idea. So I agree with you. We really do need a central place of what resources are available.
So, sorry, you need a mic. I'm so sorry.
He was saying everyone agrees with it. Okay. It's a question who doesn't. Tell you what, we'll talk after. I'm not bad at websites. We'll figure it out.
So I think that we've got one last question, although there's a hand up on the floor. But this would be the last question then.
So my question, and I apologize, I came in late, so if it's already been answered, is about Bill 175, the Connecting People to Home and Communities Care Act. From the panel, what are some of your concerns with the new bill, and what are some of your hopes around how people with disabilities will be consulted in the bill's implementation?
Does anybody have expertise on that that's sitting on the panel? No. So I think that maybe it's an excellent question, and maybe what I can do is I can ask Dave to take that back into Easter Seals and do a response from Easter Seals. Okay, so with that, we are done our plenary. I want to thank our presenters so very, very much for your time, for your honesty, your candor, and your willingness to be sitting up here potentially with a target on your chest. So I thank you very much. It's not an easy job to be there. It's way easier to be here, and so I thank you, and thank you very much to Easter Seals. Thank you to Dave, and thank you to Anna Maria. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Maureen.
you.
Thank you, Maureen. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm a little bit short here. On behalf of Easter Seals Canada and all of the participants here, I really want to express our sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for your time this afternoon and sharing your experiences, your expertise, and also to talk about some very important issues, issues that affect all of us here in the room, our families, our friends, and our co-workers. So on behalf of everyone here, thank you all so very much. Please join me in congratulating everyone. I would also like at this time to thank Maureen very much. I have a little something here for you. Thank you and appreciation.
Thank you for the little somethings. Thank you.
Thank you.